Welcome to Players Only, your backstage pass behind the scenes of today's PC and video game industry. I'm Scott Steinberg, and in this episode, we're going to take a closer look at game journalism and how today's reporters are rewriting the script. But first, let's peek at why the field struggled for so long to establish itself and gain widespread acceptance.
One of the things we've noticed about the game media is that it's not often formally trained in journalism. So it has often an immaturity about it. And it's so centric to its basic concerns that I think it's forgotten a lot about who its audience really is. I don't think there's any surprise that the magazines are failing across the board, for the most part, and that online's seeing a lot more, and that blogs are seeing a lot more. Like Kotaku is a lot of people's favorite because it's really critical. If a game is horrible, they say this game is horrible. Where it's very hard to have a publishing magazine that's a business say a game is horrible, and yet that game publisher is supplying 30% of its ad revenue.
Yeah, I have a great respect for game journalists. What I don't like is when they, don't review something properly. They'll do a quick Google search and get other people's ideas and write about a game without having done it thoroughly themselves. You shouldn't take any shortcuts, and people should have pride in what they do, respect for the people they're talking about or the products they're talking about, and try not to score points or impress their friends, and also review a product for the market for which it's intended.
The gaming media will judge and rate games based on a score, but it'll judge Gran Turismo 4 right next to something that's totally new and innovative and different. And so Gran Turismo 4, which is on its fourth iteration, basically the same game. If they can't get it perfect by now, they suck, right? Really, right? It's like, come on, it's just better graphics, better control, Whereas here we have something totally outside of the box, totally unique and different. But the way they're going to rate it is based on this perfection meter.
I understand the need for Metacritic. I understand the need, or some feel the need for game scores, but I rail against game scores, and that's because I feel that it's too easy for games, especially the PR side of things in marketing, to look at that number and decide that that's the basis for whether the game is successful, and that's horrible. Like, a game cannot be boiled down to a single number.
One of the things that's happened over the last few years is the industry has matured. I think the journalism has some as well. But now that it's moved onto the web, we're actually starting to see a real diversity in the kinds of pieces that get written. It's not all about reviews anymore. And I actually find that really encouraging, because just reading the reviews was getting kind of old.
Personally, when I'm doing an interview and a media representative comes in from a website or television or whatnot and asks, how many weapons are in your game? How many levels are in your game? How many vehicles? And I'm just like, that's in the back of the box, like, you'll find that out. Ask about the characters and their motivation, ask about the themes of the game, ask about influences, ask about other products, ask about pop culture, ask about the weather, anything but the same thing that we've been asking over and over again in order to dig a little bit deeper. And I think you're seeing the rise of a few key journalists who are starting to ask the right questions in the industry, and I think it's going to continue to get better.
But will game journalists really get the chance they need to improve? After all, so many say the media is dying.
No, the media isn't dying. People consume more information these days than they ever have before. There's more information out there, and people show continued interest through going through whatever websites they go through to get information, to find out what's going on in the world or about the things that they care about. What's changed is the willingness people have to pay for that. People don't want to pay for a lot of things they used to pay for.
The problem is the type of media is growing, and the reader's interest in taking in media is growing. So some types of media may be dying, but the interest in media is increasing.
You have Game Informer still doing well because they have a deal where they're basically positioned and packaged almost as advertising within the GameStop chain. So having a cover story on a GameStop is essentially like having more billboard advertising. But that's a deal with a retailer that keeps them around. Nintendo recently stopped publishing Nintendo Power themselves because the president of the company said that they could reach their consumers more effectively through online. So one of the major shifts, of course, over the last 10 years is that the internet has pretty much replaced print as the prime way that people get their video game news.
If you look, blogs have been very influential in terms of changing the way that other people do their coverage. One great example would be OneUp.com, the traditional enthusiast game site that did, news stories and reviews and previews, looked at Kotaku and looked at Joystick and started doing their news in that way, not only in the sense of mimicking the structure of a blog, but really mimicking what they were doing in terms of adding analysis into news stories.
I think as gamers mature and also grow older. Those are two separate things. That they demand more from the people who write about gaming. I think also with the increasing death of print journalism, both in gaming and elsewhere, that game journalists are expected to come more to the plate.
No, of course the media is not dead. Perhaps traditional forms of media are on their way out, but that's just, they're going to be replaced by something else. You know, and the people who are going to kind of come through this transition are people who can look and see, okay, what exactly do people want?
Obviously, we're seeing a fundamental shift in the way news is reported and breaks, so how are journalists coping?
So the major change for game journalism is that anybody can do it. And one of the things with journalism is that for the longest time, everybody has always thought they can do it. Now they have the tools that they can do it. That's good and that's bad, because what's bad about that maybe is that there might be less respect for the craft of journalism even among those who do it themselves. But what's good is that it's giving more people the opportunity to try, and that eliminates, I think, a snobbishness or an aloofness that journalists might have in relation to the material that they have. They now know that their readers have just as much an ability to reach millions of people as they themselves do. In fact, their readers probably can reach more people.
It's not stratified. Like, you know, you will see these guys with their masters in journalism quoting the kids on the blogs and kind of pulling their stories in. So it's really fascinating just how much overlap and mix there is.
I used to be a newspaper reporter for 20 years, and I switched a year ago to write for a blog, VentureBeat, and it was a big shift. I had to get used to a different kind of writing where it's immediate, very opinionated, you get it out there fast, and then you try to improve it with comments coming in from readers.
There's less and less of a distance between the journalists and those who they're serving, their readers, and that's the operative verb, serving. You have to expect that your readers know at least as much as you. Collectively, they know more than you do.
Obviously, it's a whole new ballgame, but how will these changes ultimately reflect on the profession in the end?
Games journalism, for a lot of its existence, had trouble reconciling whether it was about games fandom and games interest or about games critique. Was it a review, like, was it TV Guide, was it Car and Driver, was it Food and Wine? I don't think it knew. And I think part of what's happened over the years is that we've seen almost every variation of that, from house organs to more critical journals, so to speak.
I think the biggest change in video game journalism over the past few years is the growth or the appearance of a lot of very smart people at a lot of mainstream publications who aren't just covering video games as part of what they do during the day, but you see Newsweek and you see MTV and you see the New York Times going out and finding individuals who are just going to cover the video games beat for them, and these are people who really do understand gaming.
I think the notion that game journalism is inept and corrupt, particularly in the US, is just total. Game journalism is not the Wild West it once was, and we probably have smarter journalists and more creative journalists working in games now than ever at any other point. And so I think that for people to sort of say it's corrupt, I think it just becomes sort of conspiracy theory.
Game journalism stands out from other journalism in that they break stories faster than any other industry. I mean, something happens, it's reported somewhere within seconds, and that's awesome.
For me, what's happening to video game journalism, I mean, in a sense, I kind of like it because it's, it's more competition. It's really pushing me to be good. It's not. It used to be just sort of a happy accident. I write about video games, and you aren't necessarily any better at doing it than the next guy. You just happen to get the job. But now it is becoming, more of a meritocracy, and you've really got to prove yourself, and you've really got to illustrate to people why you should get paid to do this when there's hundreds and thousands of people out there who are going to do it for free.
Time to step your game up. We'll see you next season on Players Only.